So I grew up in a home we had lots of money. My father was an attorney, was a labor attorney, and we came to Cincinnati because he had a job with Kroger, and then later he went to private and was P&G, one of those many P&G attorneys, and did all their labor negotiations. And so, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom, if you can call it that. Our housekeeper pretty much did everything. And I grew up in a home with lots of addictions. I think every addiction I saw in my family. And I was always surviving. I was the oldest of four. And so when my father died suddenly at 41 of a heart attack, we were about to go on a vacation that year, which was really odd because they wanted to go to Vegas, because they go to Vegas all the time. They were compulsive gamblers and partiers and everything else. So my sister was going to go to one camp. I was going to go to this like crazy canoe thing in Vermont where you go to Canada and you canoe and pack your canoe and walk and this whole crazy thing. And then my brother and sister were going to go stay with my cousins. And so like a week before the vacation, he dies suddenly of a heart attack. And my mother decides she wants everybody gone and sends my brother and sister away. Or no, my brother and sister were going to actually stay with them and go to Vegas, that's right. And then when everything fell apart, she threw them with my cousins, who later I found out were alcoholics and abused them the whole summer. And then my sister went to the girls' camp, which was in, I forget where, Maryland or something. And then I went to this camp where my mom drove me 17 hours to Vermont, like 4 days after my dad's buried. And no sleep, literally drove me, wouldn't speak to me the whole time, drops me off at dusk, like 9 o'clock. I was supposed to be there like 2 days before, and they give everybody a swimming test to get to swim in a lake. Well, I'd never been in a lake. And I'm asthmatic, so I jumped in a lake, it was freezing, and it froze up, and then I obviously couldn't swim. So then they didn't know what to do with me, because the camp, the age ended at 13 or 12, and I was 16. So they couldn't take me on the trip, so then they sent me home, and she didn't want me home. And she was pretty drunk and pretty much in her room. In fact, I haven't talked to her in 15 years. My brother said, because she's been 40 years almost in bed, she can barely walk and do anything today. So I ended up living with a family that summer, which was actually wonderful. And then she ended that right before school started. When my brother and sister came home, I would drive, I would work, go to school, make sure that we had groceries and food, and make sure my brothers and sisters were fed and taken care of all the way through that semester. It was a very hard semester.
And how old were you then?
I was 16.
16. Jeez.
Yeah, and I was a junior in high school, and I was struggling in school because I went to a very challenging high school, St. X, and I was just getting through.
Close family. I was raised in a Christian home. Never really, I mean, we did Christmas and family vacations and stuff, and I was the only person in the family that smoked cigarettes at some point and did drugs. My sister was straight, she wasn't a straight A student, but she was straight-laced and did goody two-shoes and did everything that a child was supposed to do as far as being responsible, and she did well in school and all this, whereas I struggled in school. I had a learning disability, hyperactivity, and stuff like that. And so I think my best friend that I had from like 7th grade or so, my sophomore year, moved to Illinois. I was mad at his dad, but looking back on it now, it's like, you gotta do what you gotta do for your family and for your career. That's what you wanted to do. So, but it was shortly after that I started smoking pot, and it just progressed from there. I knew that I did have a problem before entering the program, and I knew I needed help. But at that time, I wasn't 100% willing to admit that I needed help. And so I didn't go to my mom and dad and said, hey, I've got a problem. I can't get a job because my first thing in the morning is I got to get my drink. I got to get my first drink of the day. And this is 6 o'clock in the morning, waking up and going down to the convenience store that didn't open until 7, and me sitting in the parking lot waiting for them to open, and then going in and getting my beer in a bag of ice, and I'd throw it in the back of a cooler in the back seat of my car, and I would just drive around all day drinking. And the fact that I was drinking and driving most of the day was scary enough too. That I wasn't just going to a park or going someplace and just relaxing. I was out driving around. And how I never got into an accident or never got arrested for
Sure.
DUI was a puzzlement to me. But I had just turned, well, I had been drinking since I was 18. Is when I started drinking. I had done other drugs in high school, but then pot wasn't available after I got out of high school, so I started drinking. And I don't think, I'm trying to remember if I was out of high school and I started, a friend of mine had got kicked out of the house his senior year, and instead of smoking pot, he was huffing glue. And it was actually a product called white plastic rubber, and it was made by a company called Duro, and it was abused all over the tri-state area. They put it in plastic bags and huff it. And so I did that for a little while until I realized this stuff's gonna kill me. I knew that respiratory arrest had happened.
Okay.
It could happen with that kind of drug. And I had actually, while huffing it at times, 4 different times, I had blacked out and come to crying my eyes out. Just absolutely crying. And I later learned when I was in EMT school that when a baby is born, it doesn't breathe on its own until it starts crying. And so I'm like, oh, I went into respiratory arrest when I was going into these blackouts. I was blacking out and going basically, and the last time it happened was in a park that was closed. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I did it and came to crying, and I got to thinking about it, that I might have died in that park, and nobody would have found me until 7 o'clock the next morning. So I would have been already dead for 7 or 8 hours before anybody found me.
That's scary.
So yeah, so that's what got me to say, I'm not doing this glue stuff anymore, I'm done. So I just drank at that point from there on out. But it was a daily thing, and I couldn't stop.
I did not get along with my stepmonster. We fought all the time. We were like oil and water, our personalities clashed. Plus, she was difficult to deal with. She was really, I don't know if overbearing is the right word, but real picky, and just little things we get in trouble for were stupid. And I was pretty much the one that was guilty of everything. I was like the family scapegoat. If something went wrong, it was usually my fault, according to her. Of course, her son was a saint and never did anything wrong. My dad and I always had problems because he was really strict. He was an authoritarian, and I was strong-willed and rebellious, and that did not work well. So I spent a lot of time avoiding my parents and my family. I spent a lot of time in my bedroom alone, and that was something they were concerned about. They thought that was not good. They found out about it from church. There was, my stepmother was really friendly with who we found out was the intake coordinator. It was one of the straight moms. Yeah. So this guy, his name was Eric. I remember seeing him at church. I never talked to him, but I remember seeing him there. And my stepmother and his mother were friends. And I guess she was talking about what a pain in the ass I was, and she was talking about how great straight was, and it sounded like the perfect answer, I guess, because I was the problem and that she wanted to get rid of, so she found her way.
Well, because Channel 9, local news channel around here, did a story on the straight in St. Pete because several of the tri-state people were down there. And so my mom and dad called me into their bedroom when they were watching the program, and at one point the camera panned during an open meeting in St. Pete, and I saw a girl that I went to church with sitting on the front row. But that was my first exposure to straight. And then at some point I was out in my garage smoking a cigarette, and I saw my mom and this girl's mom sitting in a car talking. And I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. What's going on? Why aren't they inside talking? And then when I got down to Florida, I'm like, they were talking about putting me in the program.
She actually sent me to a what do you call it, a therapist. A learn lady was learn later that this therapist made kickbacks for referring people to straight. He was totally dishonest. Like, I was telling him what was going on in my world, and he didn't hear any of it. He thought I was on drugs. They gave me 2 drug tests. Obviously, I didn't do drugs, so they were blank. And then when she took us to Florida, put me in this program, I didn't even know what drugs were. I didn't even have time to do drugs. I told you, when was I supposed to have time to do drugs? Obviously I was in shock, because if there was an alcoholic in the family, it certainly wasn't me. So the reason that she put me in there was she wanted me out of the picture so she could do what she wanted to do, because I have a conscience. I knew there was going to be an issue there, and she wanted the kids separated from me. So literally, since that straight experience, my brothers and sisters and I have really never really been very close. We're just starting to get, I wouldn't even say close. And they had their own hell. My brother, 6 months into straight, would be taken away for the remaining 2-year time that I was involved with straight, and he was a ward of the state.